Starting recording and all right. Hello everyone. This is Mr. Brass and this is another discussion slash debate that we are going to be having today on basically, does Christian theism account for providing a likely solution for the problem of evil? And in today's corner, I have two good friends of mine that I would consider. On the one hand, we have from YouTube, he is known as the Christian Idealist on YouTube, Kyle Alander. And on the other side of this, he's known as the Alchemist on YouTube. His name is Eric Mackie. All right. So I just want to give a cool, clean, to the point amount what the rules are here and how the format is going to be. It's going to be Eric is going to go first. He's going to, for one, he's going to tell a bit about himself and he's going to make his points in why he believes that Christian theism does not provide a likely solution for the problem of evil. And afterwards, Kyle is going to talk about himself for a bit, and he's going to make his case for why he does believe that Christian theism can provide an adequate answer for the problem of evil. And once that is gone, there will be an open discussion where you two can feel free to say where you believe each other are wrong and make critiques. Now, I want this to be a civil discussion. I believe you both are adults, and so that's no worry. And so, yes, we're going to start now, and it's going to start off with Eric. So, you go, Eric.
Alrighty. Thank you, Derek, aka Mr. Brass, for taking the time out to host this debate between me and Kyle on this subject. I appreciate it. So a little bit about myself. Okay, I wrote a brief introduction down here, but most of this is just going to be off the dome, basically. So let's see. My position is for all intents and purposes, I'm an atheist. I'm a physicalist. And I was at one point a Christian. So I do have, firsthand experience with that worldview on a practical and an intellectual level. I'm aware of, many of the criticisms back and forth that each side has for one another. And for the longest time, quite a number of years, I was on the other side of the fence. I would be in Kyle's shoes right now, defending the Christian standpoint. And it is what it is. It took quite a while for me to kind of break down and analyze for myself over the years why I slowly, kind of gradually began to fall away from the faith for a number of reasons, and come to this conclusion finally that I think it's not true, just straight up not true, and has no bearings on the reality of things as a whole. And one of the primary reasons for this, that's the subject we're discussing now, is the problem of evil. Now, for anybody who's familiar with like the scholasticism of this all, they're aware that for the most part, the logical variant of the problem of evil is kind of dead in the water. I think there's a little wiggle room there still, and I'll address that later, but we're going to be talking about the evidential variant of the problem of evil specifically today. And the evidential variant of the problem of evil is basically, does the evidence um, of evil and pain and suffering and so on in the world, does that mount up against the claims of, Christian theism and their defenses that they offer, to the point where you can say Christian theism is, if not outright false, at least unlikely to whatever degree you personally conclude it to be. Um, and I think there's a pretty good case to be made for this. Plenty have done it before. There's nothing really original here that I'm going to throw Kyle's way today. So if it gets a little repetitive, my apologies. So let's see. Before I jump into these reasons and these examples that I have written here, a little bit more about my background as a Christian. I more than I can count. I've read a number of books, listened to countless talks and lectures and debates and so on over the years between um, some of my favorite at the time, and kind of still even now, favorite Christian philosophers, theologians, apologists. Names like William Lane Craig, Richard Swinburne, Alvin Plantinga, N.T. Wright, John Lennox, and so on. I was pretty versed in the philosophical and theological realms. I was no expert by any means. And of course, I never claimed to be. I don't have any degrees. I don't have any, let's say, formal education in terms of, attending any like Ivy school to like get my doctorate in anything, or just any degree really. I'm just somebody who learned from those who did, and who, those who did have those qualifications. Um, and then this would extend over into New Testament scholarship, which I was very big into, regarding like the history of the Christian faith. And I would read a lot from, listen to debates involving, New Testament scholars like Gary Habermas, Craig Blomberg, Daniel B. Wallace, Michael Licona, Tim and Lydia McGrew. The list goes on and on. I was very interested in that field as well. So on the intellectual side of things, I would like to consider myself fairly grounded. I think I have a good enough, at least, grasp of Christianity as a worldview. Again, on an intellectual level, and then also on a practical level, I tried my best when I was a Christian to live it out daily in my personal life, morally and otherwise. And let's see, I guess that's the gist of it. So yeah, I was a Christian, and I was pretty versed in all those different areas that one can be versed in and should be versed in, no matter what side of the fence they're on. um and then fast forward, a few years later, now I find myself, like I said, on the opposite side of that fence. I'm an atheist now. I hold to physicalism, and this was primarily due to the problem of evil. A little bit of both the logical variant and the evidential variant, um, but we're going to be focusing on the evidential variant today. And I've got some examples here, um, of what exactly I mean, like very specific examples by like uh, evil per se, and suffering and pain and all this. And before I go into these, I would just like everyone to take a step back for a minute and really try to, if not empathize, maybe like sympathize, like put yourself in the shoes of people in these situations that are like being affected by these things, on a very deeply personal level, on a day-to-day basis, because that matters too. I think this extends beyond just the intellect. I think it does have certain what's the word I'm looking for here? Implications, emotionally and psychologically. I think that should all be factored in to our decision making, when it comes to thinking through these issues and coming out on whatever side we do, whether it's true, false, somewhere in between, whatever. So just keep that in mind as we go along here. So some of these examples or evidence of evil, pain, suffering, etc., against Christian theism that I think makes it look extremely weak, and if not outright false, then just extremely, extremely unlikely. Let's take, for example, the violent and traumatizing rape of women and men alike of all ages. Many of these instances, unfortunately, leading to crushing amounts of subsequent emotional and psychological damage, which in a lot of these cases leads to various forms of self-harm and even suicide. Various forms and extents of sexual molestation, abuse, and torture of even just mere children. Murder and mass murder, like for example, sociopathic and or psychopathic serial killers and mass shooters, this sort of thing. Barbaric and excruciating torture of innocent people, and this again would include even children, via things like gang violence, like from street gangs or cartels, or just random crimes of opportunity, really. I gave some examples that I found, and I wish I didn't, from like the deep web, even of things like this. Very disturbing stuff. Um, Child trafficking and human trafficking in general, poverty all around the world to the point of total destitution. There's many examples of this in the good old U.S. of A. here where we live, and even so much more so in third world countries. And this all inevitably leads to things like mass die-offs of human life and animal life, via starvation and disease, environmental issues, sharp spikes in criminality, economic collapse, so on and so forth. There's an abundance of wars on both a small and large scale, raging all over the world for a variety of quote unquote reasons. These would include religion, race or ethnicity, uh, natural resources and territory, political ideologies, a slew of corrupt and shady dealings going on behind the scenes for one reason or the other, for no reason at all. There's sicknesses and disease like cancer, dementia, heart, kidney, lung ailments, COPD, muscular dystrophy, heart attacks, strokes, seizures, different types of mental disorders like depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar, PTSD, psychopathy, sociopathy, and so on, that all eventually rob the person who is affected by them of life prematurely, and or just leaves them in a just utter state of such a low quality of life they may as well be dead. Let's see, there's if you want to bring in natural evils, there's natural disasters like hurricanes and flash floods, typhoons, tsunamis, blizzards, earthquakes, landslides, tornadoes, volcanic eruptions, etc., that kill and displace just innumerable amounts of people every single day and every single year in our world, and utterly destroy entire environments. And these are that's like a brief sort of list of just some reasons or evidences or whatever you want to call them that I think a person can cite and really think about and reflect on when it comes to contrasting that with the claims of Christian theism. The idea that there is this God, this creator God that exists, who is like innately good. He's all good. He's all knowing, all powerful, etc. I think there's a case to be made against that claim here, pretty robustly. But I think I will leave things there for now. I think I got the general message across. And like I said, things can get very repetitive because there's nothing really unique or original here in my position. I just think that there's a reason for that, and that's because they haven't been adequately answered. They haven't been adequately responded to, and that's why these these sort of problems in philosophy and theology and so on keep coming up and up and up again by skeptics, because the answers or quote unquote solutions, theodicies offered to try to remedy these problems, they fall short and fall flat on their face every single time. And that's what we're here to get into. So that's the gist of things. I'll go ahead and mute myself and let my opponent here take the wheel. Thank you.
All right. Well, beforehand, Eric, I would also just like to understand, like, what is the sort of moral theory that you go for? Like, there is virtue ethics, there's deontology, and all of those. What would you say is the one that you find more like likely to be true on those sort of things?
I'm not quite nailed down on one or the other just yet. I think I go between like pretty much basic like moral subjectivism and moral nihilism at this point.
We can discuss that in the dialogue.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure, for sure.
the reason why I ask is because a lot of times in problem of evil debates, it often comes down to ethical theories, like because evil
I'll go
for
over that. I'm gonna go over that in my opening statement. So
all
we
right,
can discuss. Yeah.
make sure. All right, all right. So now we're going to go to Cal Alander. He's better known as, like I said before, as Christian Idealism, and he's going. He's set up a PowerPoint presentation himself, where he's going to delve into why he believes that Christian theism has, in fact, um, provided a likely answer to the problem.
So what I'm gonna do is, because Eric spent a lot of time talking about his own personal story, I'll begin with mine. So for me, I've been a Christian for most of my life. I deconverted like about 5 or 6 years ago for like a period of 6 or 7 months, and then I reconverted back when I investigated the evidence. Like Eric, I studied a lot of the arguments of both sides, and I retained my Christian faith in light of the objections. But I think, in the reasoning, I think why I retained it is probably because I did kind of dig deeper than on the surface level. So one reason I think that has retained my Christian faith is my overall epistemology to this question. So as an undergraduate in philosophy, I specialize, well, I study philosophy in generally and an academic level, but my specialty is actually the philosophy of science, and specifically I currently studying Bayesian confirmation theory. And Bayesian confirmation theory is a theory about how we should assess whether one proposition makes another likely. And Bayesian confirmation theory is also, I think, that is the foundation of not only the epistemology of science, but also the epistemology of any worldview that you might hold. And so I think that I'm an evidentialist first, which means that I don't believe in Christianity by blind faith. I believe it because it is supported by the evidence. And so I would say I'm a Christian because it is supported by the evidence. And I'm sure Eric would probably agree with me on at least on that at least he wouldn't agree with me that Christianity is supported by the evidence, but I think we would both hold to this idea of evidentialism. And so that's what I'm going to be operated on for my opening statement. Just to give you a little background on that. And then in terms of my YouTube area, so I've been on, I recently kind of retired from YouTube a little bit, but I recently started a blog going over some of my research into other areas. But today I'm going to present a PowerPoint, and I'll share my screen. Okay, can you guys see that? Okay, so I want to begin by first starting off where I think, and it will become clear as we go through this presentation, what exactly the issue is. I think that the number one issue, and not just the problem people debate, but in the God debate in general, is going to come down to axiology. In fact, I think the question of axiology is going to determine whether you're a theist or an atheist. I think there is no other issue that is more important than that. That is the number one issue. So because of that, I'm going to focus primarily on that in this presentation. So, okay. So first of all, we need to understand the structure of the explanation. Okay. One thing about theistic explanation is that it is identical to theodicy. So here I'm defending theism as the proposition that there is an omnipotent being that acts on the basis of axiological reasons. Here I understand an omnipotent being with both freedom of will and perfect efficiency of will. And I would also say that God's will in this case is guided by the entire axiological domain. Hence, God does not only bias towards moral goods, but he also wants to pursue all the categories of goodness, which include moral, alethic, and aesthetic values. And so, because of this, our theory of what a best action is going to be influenced by this axiological domain, since best actions incorporate all values in this analysis. Now, there are two stages to theistic explanation. Stage one is you identify your value theory or your axiology about what a best action is. And stage two is you combine theism with your theory of axiology and confirm it with the evidence via a confirmational holism. And again, we can discuss that in the dialogue. So notice that this structure, so the two-stage structure that I just went over, is the exact same structure as how a theodicy works. In fact, Trent Dowdery's saint-making theodicy has this exact two-stage process. And so all theistic explanations have the same logical structure, and that structure can be applied across all data. Now, a theodicy is a theistic explanation of the specific data of evil and suffering, but here's the important part. The structure of a theodicy is identical. Again, not similar, identical to the structure of all theistic explanations. The reason for this is that all theistic explanations or the reason why it's structured that way is because God is all good, and thus there is a probability of one that he does a best action. Thus, anything that we identify within stage one, within our axiology, can be easily transferred to stage two, as long as we find evidence that matches what those conjunctions predict. In this way, we can say that stage one is a way for us to screen off all disconfirmatory evidence against theism, and stage two is a way to confirm theism and our value theory using the tools of confirmational holism. Again, I'll discuss what that means later. But here we see that all of God's actions are axiological. Thus, it is through this axiological lens that we shall be viewing the evidence for and against theism. Now, where does evil take place? So here's the important thing. Evil doesn't take place in a world simpliciter, but rather it only occurs relative to agents. Therefore, my analysis does not involve any talk of worlds which contain evils, but only rather creatures which experience evils. Thus, where evil is located is the subjective experiences of creatures. And therefore, the core question we should be concerned with is this. Is there a creature, or has there ever been a creature, or will there ever be a creature that has an existence, again, existence, that is on balance bad? So in order to generate a disconfirmation of theism under this structure, one cannot go from a description of evils to it being a disconfirmation. So I notice how Eric Mackie decided to list all these evils, but what he didn't do is he didn't show how the evils in question actually provide a disconfirmation. Here, where I understand a disconfirmation to be, is that an evil is unjustified. In this case, we can say that an unjustified evil is a disconfirmation of theism. So here's the logical structure. Let's call theism T. So in order for the problem of evil to work, one must show that E, which is our evils, entail X. In this case, we say that X is an unjustified evil. But to generate an X, So to generate the proposition that this is an unjustified evil, there must be something about the evil that makes unjustified. One cannot go from a description of some evil to it being unjustified. So in order to make these connections, in order to say that you have some evil that is an unjustified evil, you actually have to bring in a value theory. You have to bring in an axiology. So here's the thing, and this is, I would say, how you can generate disconfirmation. To get from E, our evil, to X, which is an unjustified evil, one must have conditions which we can call Y factors. So here are two factors. Y1, creatures receive no compensation for their sufferings. Their evils are not defeated. Here's the second condition, factor. God will only authorize intense suffering if it is necessary for a greater good, a necessity condition. Now, to be clear, even if we grant these conditions, there's still other conditions, which I call the Z factors. Number one is that the goods that allow permission of an animal suffering must come to the individual animals who undergo the suffering. Z2, animals do not receive compensating goods. And finally, a creator has moral duties to his creation. So I would say all these factors need to work in order for you to get from E to X. Now, I will assume that the Z factors are correct. There are some theists out there that will say that, for example, God has no moral obligations towards creatures. I don't take that position, and I'm not going to defend it. So I will grant the Z factors for the sake of argument. But if this is the case, we need to show why the Y factors have attained, right? But in order to show why Y has attained, or why Y has attained given the evil that we observed, we need to actually show that. And I will argue that these Y factors have not obtained. So again, all I need to do is show that the Y factors have not obtained, and that undercuts every single objection, or every single example, I should say, that Eric Mackie has brought up. So here's the idea. Here's the first consideration. If the theist can show that the extension of suffering, or let's say the expected utility of suffering, can ultimately be defeated on their theory, then this shows that the first factor has not been obtained. So here's my condition, or the defeat condition. An evil is defeated when it is integrated as a constitutive part of a valuable composable whole that not only outweighs the evil, but could not be as valuable as the whole without the evil. Now, one way to kind of view this condition is through the lens of art. An artistic art piece will include ugly elements, right, in their work. But then you can, if you look at the art piece as a whole, you can see that this art piece is actually good on the whole. So I would say that evil kind of works in this way. There are evils in the world, and they kind of serve as ugly art pieces. But if we view God as wanting to pursue evils for aesthetic reasons rather than necessarily moral reasons, and again, we can get into that distinction in the discussion, then I would say that it's a justified evil, and therefore God is authorized to allow it. Another thing, too, with suffering is that a defeat-based axiology implies that the circumstances of the evil are less important than the meaning a creature created out of those circumstances. In this way, we can say that no evil, again, no evil, comes into existence with ready-made meaning. This is why evil looks gratuitous. The supposed meaninglessness is actually because the suffering is meaning pending or meaning awaiting. And so what you could say is that there is a space between suffering and our response to it that will determine its meaning. So we can say that horrific evils are just those evils that have potential for meaning making and are potentially defeatable, but they are not intrinsically indefeasible or intrinsically meaningless. And again, the only way to offer a disconfirmation of theism is to actually show that there is an intrinsically indefeasible evil that came into existence, and none of the examples that Eric has brought up actually fulfill this condition, which I would say completely undercuts any of the arguments he's presented so far. So, assuming the defeat-based system, we can say that for God's goodness to be obtained in light of evil, the agent must be able to individualize their suffering and come to see how God loved them. Thus, on this system, God is justified in authorizing evils as long as the evil ultimately be defeated. This renders the atheist background assumption, which is the second factor from earlier, wrong. So again, I'm operating under a defeat-based system rather than a greater good system. And so if we say that we can tell a story or a narrative that holistically provides an aesthetic defeat-based justification, again, not a greater good justification, but rather a defeat-based justification of evils, then this could function as a theodicy. Now, of course, it doesn't matter which theodicy we use, as long as that theodicy is consistent with this value system, we could say that the theodicy successfully explains the evils that we observe. So here we can call a theodicy or a story S. Since it is a necessary consequence of God's nature that he realized the best actions by him being all good, then for any evidential argument from evil, doesn't matter what examples you bring up, doesn't matter if it's horrendous evil, doesn't matter if it's Draper's arguments or some other argument in the literature, this applies to any argument, right? So this is going to completely undercut any other considerations. For any argument from evil, if we find ourselves in some world W, where a W in this world contains an evil E, and if the best action for God to take on behalf of that evil is contained in our theological story S, in this case, our defeat to base story, then the probability of that story, or S, obtaining in that world W is logically equivalent to God's existence. Thus, the probability of T conditional on the evil and a Saint Macon story, or let's just say any theodicy, is identical to the probability of theism itself. And this means, in probability terms, that our S, which is our theodicy, screens off E's confirmation power with respect to T. And so on this system, evils have zero evidential weight against theism under this kind of schema that I'm operated on. So here's the kind of logical structure of how this all works. So let theism be T, let Y be unjustified evil, let S be stories that entail not Y. So here's how the problem evil works. You have T, 2, not Y. So theism entails that there are no unjustified evils. But then we observe Y, and therefore Y entails not T. So by a simple theorem, Y can only be true if not, or T can only be true if not Y. However, we have S, but S entails not Y. Thus, theism is true if and only if there are no unjustified evils, which entails that theism is logically equivalent to T and S. So E, on this account, cannot count against theism, given that the probability of T and S is identical to the probability of theism. And so on this account, one must give an independent evidence against theism that doesn't rely on evil to decrease the probability of theism. And so, since we are talking about Christian theism in this discussion, I would say that the theodicy is redemptive. We could discuss this later, but again, because I'm operating under a defeat-based system, I would say that none of the examples that Eric has brought up actually show that those evils are indefeasible. And we can discuss that more in our dialogue, but that's all I have to say. Thank you.
All right. That was very good, Kyle. But like I wanted to get at before is that the reason why I brought up things when it came to meta-ethics and all that, well, I've often found in problem of evil discussions that basically people are bringing in completely different ethical series, and the ethical values that you hold to, like the framework that you use, can influence how you see evil and how you go like explaining it. Like, for example, if you were a Christian who happened to be a utilitarian.
So I don't think that, just to kind of push you back, I don't think the issue is going to come down to meta-ethics. I think it's going to come down to normative ethics. I think that's more relevant.
Well, I mean, that's what I'm sort of getting at, because a lot of times it comes down to a debate over like how you view evil and how it functions, and like, and if you have a sort of like, if you have two people with two different sort of ethical theories, that can influence how they view evil, and how they like two Christians, if one's a deontologist, one's a utilitarian, they might have theodicies that are built more with those ethical theories in mind than they would, like, so that's why I brought up that point, because I think that.
Yeah, but I don't think that's a meta-ethical point. I think that's just a normative point.
Yeah.
But anyways, I mean, sorry for I just
yeah,
want to make that distinction.
Yeah, that's what I know.
So,
But, I mean,
Eric, what do you think about my system?
All right, I took a couple of notes, like mentally, on what you responded to my opening with. So I want to address this first. One of your first criticisms was I laid out this exhaustive list of like all these examples of evil and suffering in the world, However, I didn't kind of go into why necessarily these evils I listed disconfirm or make Christian theism unlikely in any way. So do you want to, I guess, get into that and see where that goes?
Yeah, because that's gonna be so my thing with problem evil stuff is it's not the suffering that's the issue, it's what suffering entails that's the issue for theism. So do you understand that distinction?
Right. Yeah. Which is why I think, yeah, I think I would agree with you both when you bring up the point of like it matters as to what meta-ethical position you take, since that'll be your lens through which you view all this stuff through and understand it. So that's important. I think we all agree with that. But all right, let's see. So we can pick any of the examples I gave, like something from moral evil or natural evil. Um, take gosh, I don't know. So we'll go with the first one, right? Like rape, for example, as horrible as that is. Um, it matters why. This is what we want to get to the crux of why things like that happen. What is the what is the end goal, or is there even an end goal to all of this, a greater good, however you want to phrase it? I think the problem with this is the Odysseys in general kind of run into this issue. It's like a brick wall for them. The problem is ultimately that would be nice to know. That would be very helpful, logically, morally, and otherwise, if we did actually know these things, why these things happen for sure. But we, like, unfortunately, we don't. Um, let's see.
So let me clarify, respond to that point, because I think what you're operating on in this is this greater goods or this necessity condition idea where basically evils can only be justified if they produce a greater good. So there must be some the greater good that comes about from the horrific suffering. And let me make my position very clear. That is not what I attempt to do. I do not attempt to show that every single evil or horrific evil actually does produce greater good. In fact, I would deny that premise. I would say no. So in that case, I would agree with you that okay, yeah, there are certain evils that happen that do not produce greater good, right? But I would say that they're still defeasible, right? And that's all that's needed for my system to work.
You said feasible. Is that the word you used?
Defeasible, yeah.
Defeasible.
So
Okay.
basically, the idea behind the defeat condition, I mean, there's different constraints, but the one that Marilyn McCord Adams kind of operates on is this notion that that the person that experience the suffering, that within their schema, within the cognitive schema of their life, from their perspective, they actually recognize that even though they wouldn't wish that evil upon anyone else, they see that the evil that they experience actually contributed to the growth of their identity as an individual. And so in that case, it kind of they integrate it into their life as a whole. And that's why I also mentioned this idea of meaning making, right? Because Viktor Frankl, who is a Holocaust survivor, he kind of brought this idea where there's a space between the suffering that someone experiences and then the meaning that they derive from that, right? And so the idea behind that is that it's not the suffering in and of itself that comes in with ready-made meaning that makes it gratuitous. Rather, it's up to the individual to provide meaning making to that suffering, and they can see it as an integral part of their identity. So that doesn't require this greater good thesis. And so because of that, the bar is actually much higher for the atheist, because they have to show that there is no evil, that there is an evil such that that could never happen.
So,
Oh, sorry.
oh,
Go ahead, Derek.
yeah. So just so the audience knows, because they might not be as familiar with this philosophical stuff as we all are here. So basically, a greater good sort of thing is like how I would see William Lane Craig say it was where, like, let's say a child dies of cancer, like horrifically at a young age and goes through a lot of pain, you would deny, like saying automatically, like, let's say this child dies of cancer, but because of their death and stuff, there's more funding that goes into cancer research, and then later on, maybe 100 or 150 years from now, they come up with a cure for the disease. And it all stemmed from this one child brutally dying from cancer. So you would deny that, like, that would be a good response to the problem of evil.
I don't know. I think those kind of greater good responses are unsuccessful. So in that case, I agree with Mackie. I agree with Mackie, but I would say, like, hey, well, there's alternative. We don't have to use that as a theist. Don't have to operate under that assumption, because that's a utilitarian assumption as well. So,
Yeah.
So yeah.
But that's what I want to make sure that people understand, that like greater good sort of thing, because that is something that I do see in problem of evil discussions. Now,
I mean, it's not just this greater good things, but that that there's a necessary connection between the evil and the greater good, and I don't see how that could happen. So that's why I don't take that approach.
You seem to be laying out more of a because like the way you described it, it seemed like pretty like intersubjective, like it's almost like a soul building theology position.
So it is intersubjective in the sense that the evils that someone can experience is not absolutely necessary for some greater good, right? So there's no because it's not producing a greater good in the absolute sense, then it's justified, but rather it's going to be relative to the creature. So as an example, you have creature A experience some amount of suffering, and then creature B experience the same amount of suffering. Well, it could be the case that creature B, even though creature A can individualize their suffering, it might be the case that creature B can't. And so because of that, there's actually a higher constraint on God, or at least there's more that God has to do in order to compensate for suffering, because the burden is that every single individual creature must come to individualize their suffering. That's the requirement that God has to. That's the obligation that God would have to fulfill. So it's actually a much higher standard than this greater goods thing, right? Because I mean, wouldn't you agree, Eric? And I think we could agree on this point, which is, even if there is a greater good that comes about from some creature having some suffering, that doesn't actually like compensate the suffering for the creature, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So I think if we can agree on that, then there might be a way we could kind of converge on where the solution might be to this problem.
Well, yeah, and just to get what you're both saying here is like for the example with the child who has cancer, it would be one thing to say, oh, all right, 150 years after the fact that this child died of cancer brutally, that we found the cure to the cancer, but that doesn't really do anything to help the child that died from cancer.
Exactly. That's the problem.
Yeah. So that's would be what you would be going for, I would assume.
Yeah. Let's see. So yeah, so with the Odysseys, it's like, because where I was going before was I said they ran into like a sort of like a epistemological brick wall here. Even if there are, and I think there are some like better quality ones offered to the problem of evil and other objections to Christian theism. The problem is ultimately at the root of all of them, you don't know whether these theodicies actually do play out in reality or are even true. And in order for us to know that, and for them to be actually like sufficient logically, morally, etc., they would need some sticking power by being revealed by the mind of God, by like God himself. That's the only way we would know if these are in fact the reasons or justifications as to why if he does exist, why he allows for these evils to occur. And I think since we don't have that knowledge, and to my knowledge anyway, this hasn't been revealed to anybody in particular all throughout human history. I think the Odysseys are they look more like a. It's hard to not make this out in like an insulting manner, but they seem more like psychological slash like emotional crutches than anything else, than like actually things that hold any legitimate explanatory like value and scope or anything like that.
So, I mean, so since you brought up soul building,
I was going to
Eric.
respond to that point, but did you have anything? I know you're the moderator, so I don't know.
Well, I mean, I'm going to bring up just something. I want to flesh out his thoughts a bit on it since he brought up soul building. A common thing that people bring up about soul building is like, do you really need to have suffering to really build some? Could you have it without the suffering so much? Like it's one thing to say like a man jumps on a bomb and you know and he saved the lives of many people, and that sort of in that moment, you get to see real courage and displayed, and people will say, well, did we really need the guy to be blown to smithereens in order for?
Okay, I can address both those points.
All right, so
I'll go with Eric first, and then I'll respond to your kind of thoughts on that. So the first thing is you ask, how do we know that this plays out in reality? Right, that's the concern.
Yeah, like how do we actually determine if any of these theodicies are like even true and have like a place in reality if they weren't revealed from God himself that these really are the case? Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, so one consideration, here's two responses. The first response is that it was revealed. If you read, a kind of Christian narrative, it kind of does operate under this defeat-based system. I mean, it's not defeat-based. It doesn't say explicitly it's defeat-based, but this whole idea of redemption, for example, is reliant upon this notion of defeat, right? If you read the book of Job, for example, you'll find that God seems to be talking to Job and talking about these aesthetic kind of considerations in regards to the sufferings that creatures experience. So there's that consideration that the whole Christian narrative, because it's redemptive, then it includes this defeat-based narrative, or this defeat-based axiology, or whatever you want to call it. Now, when it comes to the point about, well, how do we observe that? Well, we've seen defeat happen in the world. So Viktor Frankl is a prime example, but I mean, there's the lives of the saints, the Catholic saints. A lot of the Catholic saints went through tremendous suffering, and yet they were able to grow from it and have characters that they would not have unless they went through what they went through. So we have that consideration, which is that we do observe suffering. And then there's my second response is, well, if we know, so again, go back to the structure of Theism explanation. If we start off with, if my axiology is that a best action for God to do on behalf of the evils is for God to defeat these evils, to compensate these evils, right? To make sure that these evils can become a part of people's identity so that they can grow their sainthood, so that they can learn from the experiences of suffering. If that's the axiology, and if we can join that with the proposition of theism, which is that God would always do best action where there is one, and if our theory of what a best action is what I just outlined, that axiology, and well, not just the axiology, but just like this whole idea that we learn through experiences, we learn through suffering, then the probability of that occurring, give it conditional on theism, is just going to be one, right? It's going to be identical to the probability of theism. And the only question then left is, well, do we have evidence for that? And I would say, not only do we have evidence for that, but if theism is true, then this theodicy would play out. And so here's one way to think about it in terms of like first order logic. If theism, then if evil, then this theodicy. Now, or maybe not the theodicy, but maybe like heaven or something, right? Some sort of ultimate compensation. That's just entailed from the hypothesis, right? That's just when you look at the probability spaces, in terms of like, okay, you have evil in one circle. So think of Venn diagrams. You have theism in another circle. You have the saint making story in another circle. Well, they're just going to like, given confirmational holism, in order to predict the evils that we observe, you're going to have to conjoin theism with your axiological system, your value system. When you do that, I'm saying that you actually predict the evils with a high degree of probability, right? You may not predict the exact evils, but you're still going to make a prediction. Another thing too I want to address is that just from an epistemological standpoint, I don't need to come up with a story for every single example of evil that has ever occurred throughout the history of the world. I mean, we don't do that for anything. Like, if you hold the Darwinian evolution, I don't need to observe every single life form that has ever existed on this planet in order to know that Darwinian evolution is true, or that it's likely true given the evidence. I just need a narrative that can account for the evidence that we do have, and that evolution will continue to play out in the future, right? And so because of that, I apply the same epistemology to theism. Well, I don't need a saint or a theodical explanation of every single evil that has ever occurred in the history of the world. Like, we don't do that for anything, right? I just need an overall story or narrative that kind of provides a general explanation of the type of evils that we observe. So what do I mean by type? Well, we could talk about tokens, so we could talk about very, very specific evils, or we could talk about the type of evils, right? So what I'm concerned with is the type of evils that occur in the world. I'm not going to focus on specific examples because it's not really relevant. And so because of that, I think that addresses the point about what you said, Eric, which is, well, how do we know it occurred? Well, number one, we do know we do know that it has occurred. And then, given confirmational holism, given first order logic and all that stuff, what I just went over, we know that if theism is true, then if evil exists, then we're going to have the theodicy. So that addresses your point, Eric. Now, in terms of Mr. Brass's objection, which is that, well, do we need do we need the amount of the degree of suffering that we observe to get saint making? So I would say this. I would say just briefly that I think that there is a logical connection between soul building and suffering, right? So you're going to need some amount of suffering for soul building. The only concern, I think, is the degree to which that occurs. And we could discuss that. I think that's an open discussion. But yeah.
Just to get my point out there, I wasn't so much making an objection so much as I was just saying, people that would, push back on it, this is what they would personally say.
Yeah, that's fine. I know. I was just kind of responding to that point. But anyways, is there anything you have to say, Eric?
Yeah. What would you say, Eric?
Okay. A few things. So I think we all know it's nothing like personal here. These are just ideas being discussed and criticized and all this. So I'm gonna, with that in mind, I'm gonna push back a little bit here. Okay, so theodicies. You addressed that by saying if there's, more or less the scope, the gist of it was if there's adequate reason, if we have adequate reason to believe that theism is true, in this case, like Christian theism. If there's evidence for that, then the likelihood of at least certain theodicies kind of, they go up a bit, at least. Well, okay. So who or what then revealed to you these theodicies, or any theodicy, whether you think they're good or bad? Like who or what revealed them to you? Where did you get them from? What's the source?
So I think that you don't need special revelation to know this. I think this is all natural. So again, I'm using natural theology to get this. So I don't need special revelation for this, number one. Number two, I'm just following the logic of science. So I am applying Bayesian confirmation theory to theism as a hypothesis and saying, okay, this is how this hypothesis makes predictions, which is the two-stage process I went over in my opening statement. And I'm just applying that same logic to theodicy in general. That's all I'm doing. I don't need special revelation for this to go through.
And just so I can, since I did go after Kyle a bit the last time, I'm going to push back a little bit on you, Eric, on this time too. When you say where was it revealed? Well, I mean, in the Bible, there are examples where sort of answers to natural evils is given. For example, like in John, in John chapter 9, basically Jesus healed a man that was born blind, and it was asked, why was this man born blind? Did his parents sin? And Jesus said, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but this happened so that the works of God may be displayed in him. So that seems to be a sort of an answer that, like, I think Kyle could give, that basically this man's evil is being defeated by the goodness that's going to be displayed in him. If that's what Kyle would go for, if I had to make a guess.
All right, so let's see. Kyle, you said you don't need special revelation. This is all pretty much like natural philosophy and whatnot. I don't see how we wouldn't need special revelation. I mean, theodicies, after all, are like you can call them like maybe sort of theological hypotheses at best, that like they're trying to like coherently work together this explanation for why this type of suffering or that type of suffering, natural, moral, whatever, and they're doing so under the assumption that like this actually is the case. Like this either is the case or it's very likely is the case if we were to get that knowledge revealed to us by God himself, like maybe one or a few of these would actually stick, and this would be maybe his reason or one of his reasons, or partially in some way, whatever. So I I don't know about that. Not needing special revelation, because if it doesn't come from God, or you don't think that it needs to necessarily come from God directly in order for it to work out, where else does it? It comes from humans. It comes from man, and that's not the subject matter, right? The subject matter is God, this transcendent deity, right? Like, so I don't know. I think we don't have to spend too much time on that, like going back and forth about this particular point, if you don't want to. But I don't know. I don't think that's I don't think that was reasoned out too well.
Anything else?
Using, you said using beige. What was it? Bayesian, like
Bayesian epistemology.
Yeah, for like this is, you pretty much said like this is kind of like a foundation used, an epistemological foundation in science, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I that I don't have a problem with. Science very much so is like an evidentialist endeavor. So I don't. Yeah, I
know,
wouldn't disagree with that,
so
but I don't think it would be like applicable to theism, which is I think a separate category entirely.
Well, why would it not be applicable? Because Bayesian confirmation theory deals with any proposition, doesn't just deal with scientific propositions. It applies to any proposition you can come up with. It's going to apply. It could be applicable to those.
Okay, so you're not just, okay, because what I heard was like you're using a specific like scientific variant of Bayesian theorem or whatever it is.
Well,
that's what I heard.
What I'm saying is that this is applied in science to scientific propositions, because the structure of science is Bayesian in its structure, right? You have propositions about your proposition. You have a hypothesis, which is one proposition. Then you have another proposition, which is the evidence. And then you need to ask, well, how? And then there's this idea of what's called degrees of support, which is how much does one proposition, the evidence, make likely the other proposition, which is our hypothesis. But the whole idea behind Bayesian confirmation theory is that the structure of evidence, so not the content, but the structure of evidence is identical across any domain. So it doesn't matter if it's theological, historical, right? So I'm taking the logic of science, or the logic of Bayesian confirmation theory that's used in science, and I'm just applying it here because Bayesian confirmation theory applies to any proposition. Doesn't matter what that proposition is.
Okay. So, okay, understood. Because, yeah, like I said, I thought you were talking about some very specific form of Bayes' theorem that's like only applied scientifically.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
why I was confused and
That's
like,
fine.
wait, thought there was like a category error or something going on there, but that's fine. Yeah, no, I would agree. Yeah, it's comes down to evidentialism. I agree. Um, Going back to then what you said a few minutes ago about it was like a soul building theodicy thing, about the people's characters, like some suffering must be permitted or whatever in order to build their character in some beneficial manner. Sure. Couldn't God though have? I mean, surely he has he has the power to, and presumably, if he's good and only good, he would have the will to do so. Couldn't God have just imbued these better, high caliber characters in these people in the first place, as to avoid suffering unnecessarily?
So two things. Number one, again, I'm not relying upon this necessity condition idea that there has to be some greater good from the evils, and this greater good being the soul making. But to your second point, I do think that there is a metaphysically necessary connection between suffering and soul making. The only concern you might have is, well, what about the degree to suffering? Like, does God have to permit? Does God necessarily have to permit this what's often called horrific suffering in order to produce saints? And I would say, from an absolutely metaphysical sense, no. But that's not the axiology that I'm working with. All I'm working with is the idea that there's going to be this very, very high degree of suffering, which we can call horrific suffering, that people can experience. But the only question there is whether it's justified or not, whether the suffering is intrinsically defeasible or not. And I would say it is intrinsically defeasible, and so God has the authority to authorize it, again, as long as at some point in the future that those creatures can come to individualize the horrific suffering that they experienced, right?
Well, I mean, I think
So
where if I had to speak for Eric a bit, I think where he more or less goes for, like when you talk about the saints, for example, I think the objection would more or less, like when I hear this about from philosophers when they're objecting to soul building theologies, is more or less like, I mean, is it strictly necessary? Like, if you want, to bring more courage in the world, and you want people to be their best selves, I mean, is it strictly necessary, like in the case of the saints, where they have to be sometimes crucified themselves, they have to be beheaded, sometimes upside down crucifixions?
yeah, so I would say my response would be that it's not absolutely necessary
Yeah,
in the metaphysical sense, but that doesn't really matter because we're not concerned with whether it would have to be necessary in that sense. All that we're concerned with is whether the evil is defeasible or not.
yeah. That's sort of where I would think that a lot of objections come from, because it does.
Yeah, because actually I do think, and maybe I can sympathize with Eric here. I do think that there is a debate or a question about whether the suffering that we experience is strictly logically necessary. And the reason why I say that is because there are instances where people go through horrendous suffering, and yet they don't build their characters. They end up worse off, right?
Yeah, like,
And I
like,
think at that point there could be reasonable disagreement.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's sort of like, to give an example of this is like, take a person that was, say, beaten as a child, and you know, a lot of people think, oh, well, this guy's going to grow up and know how painful being beaten as a child is, and that's going to be good. So he's going to build up his character. But we all know that very often that does not happen. It ends up becoming a cycle of violence and a cycle of evil that happens where the guy grows up and he has children and he beats them. So
well, that's why I brought up the example where sometimes people go through suffering and they end up worse off in the long run.
I was just
Right.
giving an example.
Now, I would say that because of that, and because theism entails an afterlife with a probability of 1, then the only question is whether they will soul build. And I say that if theism is true, then they will. And if theism is not true, then they probably won't. But the question of whether, in the absolute sense, whether they will soul build in the future, I would say we don't have access to that information, and so we shouldn't assume one way or the other.
What maybe this is reaching, but since you said that, you said the main issue with that line of reasoning is that since we don't have direct access to such information, to such knowledge, we shouldn't assume one way or the other. Wouldn't that apply also then to theodicies, like I was saying, because we don't have direct access to information or knowledge directly from God?
No, not necessarily, because there can be pieces of evidence that we observe in our life that do support some theodical narrative. It's just that when it comes to examples of evils that were not defeated in this life, that's where the inscrutability comes in. And in that case, then the theodicy would have to talk about the future, right? And so we're not there yet, then we haven't observed it. So it's kind of like this open question. One way to think about this is like, according to the current model of particle physics, the universe is going to come to an end at some point, right, through some heat death or whatever. And now, of course, the question is, well, we haven't observed that, so we actually we're epistemically cut off. So it's conditional on whether the current model of particle physics, or at least our current understanding of the laws of nature, are correct. And so I would say the same thing applies to theism, where because we're cut off, we cannot say one way or the other whether the evil that someone experiences is actually indefeasible or not. Right. And so because of that, then the only question left is whether God exists or not, independent of considerations of evil.
Yeah. So I just wanted to make sure, because I don't know if I got like a yes or no, and I might have.
What's the question?
We've been going back and forth, so this could have been lost in the debris of that.
No,
but
what's the question about
well,
the inscrutability part?
I said, couldn't God have just imbued these better characters in these people in the first place to avoid suffering altogether? And then ultimately, I think, just as a matter of just simple contingency, you can go as far back as to say, couldn't God have just created the world without evil or suffering at all? Is that even possible that he could have done that?
Well, yeah, but the issue is it all comes back to this question of axiology, right? So I would say that God does have reasons to prevent the evils that we observe. One idea is this kind of what I call the educative theodicy, where basically, in order to really and truly understand the horrors of evil and to grow from them, you actually have to experience it yourself, or at least see it be experienced by others, right, in some capacity. And so because of that, because of this kind of educative learning idea, or this educative theodicy, then if God has a reason or an axiological reason to allow us to learn, to experience the sufferings that we go through, well, that does logically require that he actually creates a world with a certain amount of suffering.
Okay, so you did say at the beginning there yes, that it was at least possible that God could have created a world in which evil and suffering didn't exist. That's at least possible. You agree with that?
Yeah, because, and the reason why I say it is because that's going to depend upon your axiology, right?
Okay.
Because
If
that's what motivates God's actions, right? I mean, it's also possible for God to create a world where there's no suffering at all, where everything is just created in heaven. But then the problem is that kind of world is gonna that's gonna lack certain characteristics that we would have in our world, right? So yeah, there's a logical possibility, but the issue is not whether there's a logical possibility. The issue is whether God would be motivated to do that, because again, all theistic predictions are going to be all theistic predictions are not going to be dictated by God's omnipotence. It's going to be completely dictated by his axiological reasons. So that's why I said at the beginning, on the definition of theism I'm working with, God is an omnipotent being who acts on the basis of axiological reasons. So because of that, everything's going to be guided by axiology rather than what's logically possible or impossible.
So would another way of phrasing that be God operates from his nature, which is good, like good, only good, holy, phrase it how you want. And so that's where everything he does or allows is kind of, it links back to that, his nature ultimately.
Yeah, and there's going to be, I would agree with that. I would say yes. And it's going to also depend upon, because the issue is when it comes to theistic predictions is that you first have to define theism, then you have to come up with some confirmation principle and falsification principle. So you're going to have to come up with some in principle way to confirm or falsify theism, and then on top of that, then you're going to have to come up with certain axiological assumptions about the specific state of affairs or kinds of affairs that we observe, right? And then you can join those assumptions with theism, right? So there's this long process that the theist is going to have to work through, but as long as they're consistent and as long as they don't as long as they're not, as long as it's not contradictory, then theism can make predictions based off of whatever the theist decides to lay out. And that, so.
Right. Yeah. I guess I struggle then thinking what, like if his nature at the core of it all is goodness, how the polar opposite of goodness then could come about in any such way, from that nature. But I'm trying not to get like, because that's like a whole other topic about like the omni properties or whatever. I'm trying to keep it on the problem of evil. But did you want to say something?
Yeah, so I was gonna say, do you think that God has aesthetic reasons or aesthetic axiological reasons to do certain actions?
Aesthetic reasons. Define that quickly for me.
So aesthetics has to do with the nature of beauty and art.
Oh, right. Is this like you need ugly to know what beauty is, sort of thing?
I mean, not just that, but this idea of God as an artist is going to highly influence the kind of universe that we're in. Right. Because I would say that God is an artist. And so God is not going to be motivated by purely moral reasons, but rather he's going to be motivated by aesthetic reasons as well, to prevent evils and sufferings and stuff like that.
I would say aesthetically, I think if a God who is good, like 100% good, existed and painted a picture per se, and that picture's the universe, our world, etc. I think it would be the most beautiful and tranquil thing to ever exist aside from that God. I wouldn't see any blemish per se on that portrait. I don't know. I guess if that answers your question.
Well, I guess my more fundamental question is, what do you think God's what's it called?
Well, if I may say,
No, it's coming to me. So my question to you, Eric, is what are What are God's justifying norms?
Justifying norms. Can you define that?
So what makes an evil justifiable or unjustifiable?
What makes an evil justifiable or unjustifiable?
For God to permit. For God to permit.
Oh, well, yeah, I, insofar as I know, because again, there's no direct revelation from God about any of this. Insofar as I know, there doesn't seem to be any.
So God doesn't have any God doesn't have any moral obligations to his creatures?
Moral obligate. Well,
if you say he doesn't have any norms, then you're going to be in the no norms theism camps, and if you go with that route, then the problem of evil just doesn't exist.
Well, didn't you ask like about his reasons for why he would permit evil?
I mean, not just reasons, but what are his God justifying norms? Right. So what would be God's obligations to his creatures?
Oh, what are his obligations to his creatures? Okay. I didn't know that was included. Okay. What would his obligation? Well, if he's good, then I would assume, I think rightfully so, that his obligation would be to create a world that is only good, experiences for his creatures that are only good, arguably creatures that are only good themselves, even if that's like I don't know, I know theists like to go the free will route and all. If that meant stripping free will, but we just wouldn't know about it, and that's just kind of how we would operate for eternity or whatever, like that would be fine by me. If it was just nothing but goodness, forever and ever, no pain, suffering, death, etc., that would be fine. I wouldn't mind that.
So I actually think that's where the problem of evil only becomes a problem, is if theist does accept that. And I would say that if the theist has an alternative or rival conception of what God justifying norms are, then there's no problem of evil if you go with an alternative account that actually explains the data that we observe. So I think that's the issue. It's not theism that's the problem. It's your account of what God justifying norms are that the problem of evil stems from.
Maybe partially. So you're saying it's more so like I have this problem with like the character per se in some way of God than anything else.
I think it's more or less that Kyle is saying that you have a conception of what God owes his creatures that isn't really sufficient.
Yeah, okay. I would agree with that. Yeah, I do think, again, see, because the moment you attach a quality, characteristic, whatever, of like goodness to something, like let alone a deity who's like all powerful, all knowing, etc., I feel like these things should just kind of like follow logically from that. It's like, why would a good being who is only good not do and create only good things? Why would the polar opposite of that being's nature bloom into existence? How could it, even if that thing, that just that opposite, nature just didn't exist? Like, how is that possible?
Yeah, so there's nothing about the definition of there. It might be true under certain definitions of theisms, but it's not true under my definition of theism that you could logically entail this normative thesis that God could never allow evil in any circumstance. That just doesn't follow from.
Do you believe
definition.
God has like the capacity to do evil? Or okay, because I would definitely like if okay, do you think he has
the
the
issue is
capacity to allow
God
it?
will always do what's best. God is always going to do best action. The issue is that there's different accounts of what best action is. Sometimes the best action is going to be an aesthetic action, which involves certain ugly elements, right? Given what we know from tragic art, for example, right? And I would say that that's the kind of that's the kind of world that we live in. Sorry, go ahead, Brass.
So I mean, if God's an artist, he's clearly a fan of Van Gogh.
I don't know. I mean, I mean, there is this idea of aesthetic kind of theism, where God is only interested in art. I don't take that position. I think that God wants to maximize all values, not just aesthetic, but also moral, ethic, everything of the entire value landscape. And so because of that, then there's going to be certain aspects of reality that include one or more of those elements, right? And so that's going to count as evidence for theism, right? And the only evidence against theism is going to be evidence that entails that there's the ultimate bad end for any creature, and I just don't think we have any evidence for that, because we're cut off from knowing whether some evil is defeasible or indefeasible. So on my system, there is no observable. I would go so far as to say there is no confirmed observable evidence against theism, given the inscrutability problem.
I wanted to bring up that, you know, we've gone past like an hour, and we're going to be into the hour and a half territory in about 9 minutes. So, I'm thinking, you know, because
Well, Brass, is there anything you think we should, like, what's the core? I think the core issue is axiology. So I don't know if we want to conclude on that point, but
I mean, like I was personally saying to beginning, it's what I often find in trauma of evil debates. It really does come down, like in my opinion, down to a couple things. It comes down to like one, like what are your particular meta-ethical, normative, or whatever position that you take? Because, like I said before, a Christian utilitarian and a deontological a deontological Christian are going to probably have different frameworks for how they would answer the problem of evil, just by the nature of how they view things in terms of morality and what would even count as evil when you go to above, like in I know deontology and Unitarianism is more normative, but
yeah,
like you get to that frame, like when you go once you get to that normative, like so if you have those two kind of people that they have that different sort of even normative, it's typically going to translate to meta-ethical, and so you know they're going to have different variations of it. And I think so. I think for one hand, it's going to come down to that. I think also another thing. I know you guys didn't touch on it, but I think also it comes down to free will. For
I disagree with that, but anyways, I don't
yeah,
think free will is really relevant.
yeah, but I mean that's typically
But
what I always hear about, because in sort of these problem of evil debates. I know I was actually surprised you two didn't get into that this time.
well, but I would probably agree with Eric that the free will theodicy doesn't account for everything that it needs to take into account. So
Well, yeah, my personal problem with the free will theodicy would be is that in my own like personal prediction is that a lot of people they point out how, you know, when it comes to free will, that free will is just such this great thing to have and how amazing it is. But when you really think about evil, like a lot of the evils that we experience in life actually, you know, on net balance, actually reduce the amount of choices people can make. Like, for example, a tsunami that wipes out an entire city of people. Well, those are people that are never going to be able to make a free choice ever again. So you're not really maximizing. It doesn't seem like you're maximizing choice by having
no,
evil.
yeah, I that's why I didn't want to talk about the free will theodicy, because I don't think it works.
Yeah.
So
But that's
yeah.
what I get at. I think it does, like, and I think you do bring up a good point. It does come down to values, like, you know, which is what axiology is like the study of values. I think it does come down to how your meta ethics and your normative ethics and all that comes out to, because like I said, differing views on it will often translate to how you view evil. I also think, like I said before, like this is just me. I'm listening into it like it'd be free will, be second, and like you brought up, I would probably rank it at about a third. It would probably be values, because if you have people that have a different value set, then of course they're going to differ on even what evil is and would you how do you solve evil in general in life, let alone if you're a god. So I definitely do think that that is where a lot of these debates come down to. And so, yeah, and I'm glad I have you both on. I want, I've been talking to you too, Kyle. I want Eric to wrap up, give like his final thoughts, and just say how he has enjoyed the debate and if he's learned anything from this discussion, and if he can say that I've been fair throughout this.
All right, should I give a sort of like closing statement then now?
Yes,
Okay.
do it.
Sure. Well, I know we didn't get to iron out like all the details and all the nuances and whatnot that conversations like this involve. So if Kyle wants to like do I don't know, a round two per se, whenever he's free again, and we can set something up. Let's see. Yeah, my position coming into this was the evidential problem of evil. The issue of gratuitous evil, pain, suffering, etc., kind of made Christian theism look completely incompatible and weak in explanatory power and scope, in contrast. So that hasn't changed too much. I didn't expect to. I think we had about a fair amount of agreements, more so than I expected. We both think certain theodicies are just terrible and they just don't work. And we're both evidentialists, so we can at least approach things from that perspective. That helps, I think, provide a level playing field for us. So there's that. That was surprising. That was good. But yeah, I don't think my position has changed much. I can't say if, whether or not it will definitively in the future, near or far. We'll see what happens. And I look forward to interacting with Kyle and with Derek in future videos or streams or whatever. And yeah, I guess Kyle, you can you can give your closing now.
So yeah, Kyle, like how do you? This can be your closing. Tell the audience about. Make your final statements. Say how you liked this discussion and whether you think that I was a good moderator and made sure to go down the line and ask probing questions to you both to get your ultimate positions.
Yeah, so thanks, Mr. Brass, for hosting this, and glad it was a fruitful discussion. And I think me and Eric do agree a lot. I think we have a lot of common ground. It's just, I think it's going to come down to axiology. Like I said in my opening statement, I think everything, in fact, comes down to that. So whatever you find valuable, how you kind of interpret value is really going to 100% influence how you're going to look at this problem, right? And so because of that, just keep in mind just how the problem evil works. It's supposed to work as this internal critique. We're taking the theistic assumptions that we would not predict the evil that we find in the world. But I hope to have shown that that simply just isn't the case, that when we understand the structure of theistic explanation, this kind of two-stage process, once we understand that a theodicy is just identical, that it just has the same identical structure as theistic explanation in general, then we can use that to kind of filter out a lot of disconfirmation. And the fact that evil, it's not the evil and the suffering that in and of itself that's a problem for theism. Rather, it's what suffering and evil entail That's a problem for theism. And so in order to connect propositions about evil to propositions about theism, you're going to need to make these intermediate axiological connections. And I would say that given certain axiological connections, that not only is the evils that we observe, not only are they compatible with evil, or at least that theism is compatible with evil, but that we would actually expect it. So I would say that we can screen off all the disconfirmation that that evils come with. And so again, if you want reference, just look back on my, I think it was the second to last slide where I give the logical kind of structure of how that all works. And I would say that overall that is the structure that I use when it comes to this topic. And so given that kind of structure, then evil is just really either the evils that we observe now, either they're inscrutable because we haven't observed whether they're going to be defeated or not, and so we're epistemically cut off from knowing that. And so yeah, either it's going to face that problem, or it's just going to come down to this just general disagreement about axiology. So yeah, I really think that's the main issue. One thing I wish we could have discussed is the role that eschatology plays, because I think that all theistic predictions, I think that we need to judge God's goodness by what happens in the future, so what happens in the eschaton, rather than what happens in at the very beginning of creation. But maybe we can get into that in our next dialogue. But yeah, I am willing to have a kind of round 2 with Eric, where we can get more into the details on these issues. So yeah, whenever we're ready to do that, I'll be willing to do that. But anyways, that's my closing statement. So.
All right. Well, thank you both for coming here. And yeah, it was so nice to have you both on and to discuss these serious matters. And I want to let everyone know that you can find both these men on YouTube. I know Kyle has gotten off of YouTube. He was a Christian Idealist, and I know Eric goes by the Alchemist. And you can always find me on this channel you're watching on. But anyway, that is all for today. This is Mr. Brass saying goodbye and get wise.